of Daf Ayin Tes that the Mishnah teaches there are three types of sort of derivative Toda situations, namely where someone, let's say the child of a Karban Toda, or the replacement of a Karban Toda, or a Karban Toda that got lost, and then there was an attempt to bring something else in its place. And in each of those derivative situations, a replacement of a Karban Toda, the Mishnah said, thinking that there is no need for added loaves. And we learned yesterday that that's based on a verse, on a pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'hikriv al zevach hatoda," and he's to bring on the slaughtering of the toda breads. It tells you toda tu'una lechem. The toda needs breads. V'lo vlada, v'lo chilufa, v'lo tmurasa tu'unin lechem. But the child of the Karban Toda, it's okay, it's fine there too. The child, Baruch, it's fine there too. The child of a Karban Toda, the Tmura, the replacement of a Karban Toda, or the Chilufin, the attempt, if a Toda was lost, something was replaced, that also doesn't need bread. So let's start here. That's the last lesson that we saw. So now the Gemara is going to have a lesson of Rav Chanina, and the Gemara is going to try to figure out where that lesson was said. 2.5 lines in the end. Shalach Rav Chanina mishmeid Rav Yochanan. Rav Chanina sent, in the name of Rav Yochanan, Lo shanu ela le'achar kapara. This law that these replacements of the Karban Toda don't need bread, namely the Toda's child, the Tmura, the swapped Toda, the Chalufa, Toda that got lost and something put in its place, doesn't need bread. That's true after atonement. Avalifne kapara, but before atonement, tu'unin lechem. Then they do need bread. So what's before atonement? What's after atonement? Havi bar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Amram was trying to figure this out. Ahai, what is the case? Ilema Khalifa Todas Chova, if referring to someone who had an obligation of a Toda. In other words, he had said as a neder, as a vow, Hare Alai Toda, on me there's an obligation to bring a Toda, and then he lost it and replaced it with another animal, and then found again the original animal. So ilifnei kapara, and if you're saying that before any of them are brought, then whatever is brought, whether the first is brought or the second is brought, it's going to need 40 breads. That was already said explicitly in the Brisa, that if you find the Toda and you've already set aside another one to replace it, whichever one you bring is going to need the 40 breads. Ilachar kapara, you've already brought one, the fact that the second one is not going to need 40 breads, it's also tnina. That's also explicit in the Brisa. So what's the point of the lesson of Rav Chanina in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? Ella, so now starting today's daf, must be, what are we referring to? Achalife todas nedav. So it wasn't that he said, Hare alai toda, on me there's an obligation to bring a toda, which would be an obligation that doesn't get lost even if the toda is lost. He said, Hare zu toda. He said, this animal is a toda. And then it got lost, so he took something to take its place, and now he found the original one. So if that's the case, bein lifnei kapara, both before any of them are brought, whatever is chosen to be brought would need 40 breads, and bein la'achar kapara, and even if one was brought and now he's bringing a second one, that would also need 40 breads, because the second one really is not a replacement. Once you found the first, the second one just means that you're choosing to bring a second Toda. He said, this is a Toda, now he has another Toda, so you're bringing two. The first Toda was a gift, now he has a second Toda as a gift. So he has two Todas as a gift, both are going to need 40 breads. Because Ma'aber b'Todas, he's just increasing how many Todas he's bringing. Alright, so the lesson of Rav Chanina in the name of Rabbi Yochanan wasn't referring to that case. It wasn't referring to Chalife Toda, to a replacement Toda. Ela Avlad Toda. Must be he's referring to the case of a Karban Toda that was pregnant. The animal gave birth. And then he's saying, the Mishnah said that when a toda animal gives birth to a toda, so then that child doesn't need 40 breads. So he's saying that child doesn't need 40 breads if the mother was already brought. But if the mother hasn't been brought yet, and it's just the child being brought, then it would get 40 breads. Lifnei kapara would get 40 breads. So in second, what type of toda gave birth? Ella, what must be avlad todas nedava? It was a kind of case where he said, harezu toda. This is a toda. He's donating a toda, and this animal that he's dedicating and donating was pregnant, and it gave birth. Okay, so if that's the case, bein lifnei kapara, whether he hasn't brought the mother yet, bein la'achar kapara, or he did bring the mother, now he wants to bring the child. In both cases, it shouldn't need any breads, because mosar de todahu. What you have here is something in additional to the toda, right? The toda is the mother. This child is in addition to the mother. The toda anyway is going to be brought, so the child should never need breads with it. Ella, so what is the case of Rav Chanina's lesson in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? Avlad toda schova. It's a case where he said, not this is a toda, he said, on me is an obligation of a toda. So he created an obligation of toda upon himself. And this obligation of toda, then this obligatory toda that he separated, because he said, on me is a toda, and then he takes this pregnant animal and says, this is for this toda vow. This pregnant toda then had a child. So if that's the case, Vlad toda schova, so that's what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. Lifnei kapara, if none of them have been brought yet, and you bring the child, ta'on lechem, the child will need bread. The achar kapara, if the mother was brought, and now you're bringing the child, ein tunin lechem, so then the child's not going to need bread.
How old is the child at the time of bite?
Has to be older than a couple of days, because it has to be over 8 days old.
I mean, they really shecht a little baby animal?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, over 8 days old. The Gemara explains now, what's the lesson of Rav Yochanan? My Kamashmon, what's Rav Yochanan teaching us? The Ksav Rav Yochanan holds, Adam miskaper b'shvach hektish. The same way when a person says, I have an obligation of a toda, so any animal that he brings as a toda would work for his vow. Not only would any animal that he brings as a toda, but the child of any such animal also works as a vow. So once he said, I'm going to bring a toda, so then the child also has the status of a holy animal, and that child could be brought. Havi banami Abaye ki haygavna. Abaye also had this question. What is Rabbi Yochanan referring to when he says that after atonement, that's when we have the law of the mission of no added loaves, but before atonement, he would add loaves for something that the mission is discussing. So he says what's discussing is a child of an obligatory toda, and with this result that once he makes a vow, I'm going to bring a toda, now he separates a pregnant animal for it, and now this pregnant animal gives birth to a child, so the child is shvach kodesh, is added holiness, and since it's an added holiness from that which was holy, in other words, it's the child of what was a karban, it can become a karban, and it can be offered to fulfill the vow. Itmar Nami, this is also the way we learned in the Beis Medrash, that Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef says in Rabbi Yochanan, Chilufei todas nedava, someone who's replacing a todas nedava, namely a toda where he said, this is a toda. Bein lifnei kapara, bein liachar kapara, whether he's brought the first one, whether he hasn't, just bringing now this one for the first time. Tun and lechem, they're always going to need bread. Because it's just marba b'todosu. Even after the first one was brought, he's just bringing another toda. So of course it needs bread. Vlad todas nedava, but if you have a situation of where he says this animal is a toda, and it's a pregnant animal, and it gives birth to a child, bein lifnei kapara, whether he's brought the mother, whether he hasn't yet brought the mother, bein liachar kapara, or he has already brought the mother, ein ton lechem, it's not going to need bread, because mosar todahu. It's just something added in addition to the toda, because he said this is a toda, but this is in addition to it. However, Vlad todas chova, But if he said, I will bring a toda, not this is a toda, I will bring a toda, so there is a toda obligation. And that obligation to fulfill, he separated a pregnant, cult of, nothing's offensive here, I hope, about the toda, okay? Vlad, todas, but if he made but if it was a todas chova, namely, he said, I will bring a carbon toda. And for that carbon toda, he separated a pregnant animal. So then, lifnei kapara, tudin lechem. So before the atonement, it would need bread. Right? In other words, if he's bringing this child before he brings the mother, so he's bringing the child as the fulfillment of his vow, it works. Because the child of a holy animal can also fulfill the vow that he put on himself. I will bring a toda. But if he already fulfilled his vow, because he brought the mother, then the child ain't tudin lechem, and the child does not need bread. And that's where you had the law of the Mishnah, that the child of a toda doesn't get bread.
And it's not obligatory to shech the child too, because he already did the toda.
I think he would, we're going to see that soon, but I think he will be obligated to shech the child.
Why?
The child was part of the mother, and he's made the mother holy to fulfill his vow, made the whole thing holy, so the child was also holy. Right? But once he separates a pregnant animal as a toda, I'm not so sure that the child doesn't get slaughtered. He may not get the breads because the vow's been fulfilled, but it may have a holiness that still requires that it be brought and shechted as a carbon.
know, but he had the neder of doing a toda, and he already did it. That's it.
That's true. That's true. That's true.
Right?
And the baby is not 8 days. Also.
Well, he'd have to wait till the baby's 8 days old to slaughter it. So sometimes you have situations where the law is halacha l'Moshe miSinai that a karban chatas has to be put to death, and sometimes you don't have to put it to death, but because it was disqualified, you let it pasture until it gets a blemish, and then you redeem it. So Amar Shmuel said like this: Kol shebechatas mesa. Those cases when a sin offering animal gets disqualified and it has to be put to death, the toda, and those types of disqualifications in a toda ain't tuna lechem. It's not going to need bread. So those are the cases of our Mishnah. The child of a chatas, the attempt to replace a chatas through tmura, a chatas whose owner dies, a chatas who outgrows its term, a chatas that gets lost, and another one was brought in its place. Now, kol shebechatas roa, but then there are cases where the karban chatas doesn't get put to death. It's disqualified, so we say, okay, let it pasture until it gets a blemish, and then we'll redeem it. But so long as it hasn't gotten a blemish, we can't redeem it. So in those cases, te'una lechem. In those cases, then in a toda, it would need bread. So Masav Rav Amram challenges, we learned in a brisa. Mahu Omer, what's the meaning of the verse? Hatoda Yakriv, the toda he should bring. Why does it say Hatoda Yakriv? It actually doesn't say Yakriv, it says Yakriv Venu. So why does it say Yakriv Venu? It's for the following. How do we know if somebody puts aside a carbon toda? Then it gets lost. If he puts another one in its place, and he finds the first one, and now he has two live todos. How do we know he can either bring the first one, the original one, or he can bring the replacement one? Whichever one he brings, he has to bring the bread with it. So it says, the toda he will bring it. Maybe the second one will also need bread. That's it says Yakri Venu. He'll bring it. So one gets bread and not two. Okay. But let's say the carbon chatas in such a case. That is a case of roa, where the carbon chatas with this type of a disqualification, that it had gone missing, another one was put out in its place. So then it has to go pasture. The time we learned in the Mishnah, if a person sets aside a carbon chatas, then it got lost. Then he puts another one in its place. V'nimtzeis rishona, the first one is found. Areishtein omdos, now they're both alive. Miskaper ba'achas mehen. So one of them gets brought. Ushniya tamus, the other one should be put to death, according to Rabbi. Chacham say, no, ein chatas mesa. The other one doesn't have to be put to death. Ella, the only case when a chatas would be put to death, Ella shenimtzis la'achar sheneskaper bailim. That would be if he already brought the replacement one as the chata, so then if he finds the original gets put to death. But if he finds the original before he has offered the replacement, and the owners have not gained atonement, it is roa. Then the animal just pastures until it gets a blemish, and it gets redeemed. So you see that according to the Chachamim, a chatas that was lost and then replaced, and then you find the chatas, it goes out to pasture. But yet our Mishnah says that in that case, the second toda is not going to need bread. So you don't have a rule that wherever a chatas goes to pasture, it's going to need bread, and only where a chatas dies is it not going to need bread. So the Gemara said, well, Shmuel will tell you, Rebbe Sfila, he holds like the first opinion there. He holds like Rebbe, and therefore the Amar who said, Avuda b'shas hafrasha, if it was lost at the time that the second one was put aside, even though it was ultimately recovered before any of them were offered, then Mesa, once you recover the original, one is brought and the other one dies. And since he holds it's a case where the other one dies, so then his rule still stands, that where a chatas is going to be put to death, in such a case of Toda, the Toda would not have added breads.
So the second one, they put him in death? I don't understand.
Yeah. You put the animal to death, because we already have a carbon chatas.
So, but he doesn't have to redeem it and pay money for the amount?
No, that chatas is put to death. Ask the Gemara, so where, according to Rebbe, would you ever have a case of an animal chatas, a carbon chatas, which we say has to go pasture and get a blemish and then be redeemed? Answers the Gemara, we would find it Kid Reb Oshia, in the case of Reb Oshia. Reb Oshia explained, Hifrish shtei chatos la'achrayos. Let's say he said he did a sin. He ate chalev, ate the forbidden fats, and he mistakenly puts aside, he's nervous. He's a nervous fellow. So he takes two animals. He says, these animals are going to be for my chatas. If something happens to one, the other one will replace it. So then, miskaver bezman and shiyirtze. So he offers one. Now what does he do with the second? He already wiped away the sin. Then ashniya tireh. Then the second one pastures. Once it gets a blemish, it gets redeemed. Asks the Gemara, v'agabe toda ki gavna. But 1 second, in such a case, in regards to toda, ein tuna lechem. If he says, I have to bring a toda, and then he takes two animals and puts them as his toda, one for his vow and one in case something were to happen to the one that's for his vow. So you're not going to have two sets of bread. He's only going to have one set of bread. So again, you don't have the rule. The Shmuel's rule is wherever the chatas is disqualified, would go to pasture, then in case of Toda, there would be bread. But here it's a case where the chatas would be disqualified and have to go pasture, and yet in Toda it wouldn't need bread. So the Gemara says, Elo Shmuel, so it must be Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon Sfirale. He holds like Rabbi Shimon, the Amar who holds, Chamesh, Chatos, Mesos. He believes that there are 5 situations of a disqualified chatas where the chatas is put to death, and he holds that this is one of those. This is one of those cases when someone said, when someone had to bring a chatas, and he puts aside 2 animals because he's nervous that something might happen to one of them. So then the one that gets offered, and then that one that he had only separated as nervousness ultimately gets put to death. So if so, in a similar case, in a case of Toda, there wouldn't be a need for bread. Asks the Gemara, but if Shmuel is following Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon Leslie Klal, where does Rabbi Shimon ever have a case where a chatas has to go out to pasture? Answers the Gemara, Shmuel Nami Chadakamar. It's right. Shmuel really wasn't talking about a chatas ever going to pasture. What Shmuel was saying was kol shebechatas mesa, any scenario of a disqualified chatas, where it is to be put to death, b'toda ain't una lechem. Such a disqualification in a toda would not need bread.
Rabbi, if he puts two animals, he says if goes wrong, and then second one goes to death. But if he says, okay, I'm gonna do shech on the first one, and if everything go okay, I don't have to do the second one. This is just for reserve.
That's what the case is.
So it still has to,
So once everything goes right on the first one, the second one goes to death, according to Rabbi Shimon. According to Rabbi, the second one just goes out to
He
pasture.
already fulfilled his
Exactly.
obligations,
That's
and
right.
that's it.
That's
Everything
right.
is
So what do you
kosher.
do now with the second one?
Can't go back to the pen. You can't go back.
It would be made holy as a chatas.
But conditional.
He
But
didn't
it
make
was
it conditional.
conditional, Rabbi. It wasn't
he didn't say.
100% conditional,
There's a hedge.
huh?
It was to back it up.
Right.
Like insurance. I
What
think
is
the
it?
concept is that you think about toda chova like chatat, and then it all falls into place. All the
That's
instruments
right.
fall into place because chatat is no chatat nedava.
Right.
You either have to bring it or you don't have to bring it.
That's right.
You can't donate a chatat.
That's right. So the Gemara now says, "My Kamashim, what's the point of Shmuel?" The answer is La Fukim Rabbi Yochanan. The point of Shmuel is that he disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan. Damar Adam Miskaper Bishvach Hektesh. Rabbi Yochanan, we saw, said that if someone has made a pregnant animal Hektesh to fulfill a vow, the child of that pregnant animal can also fulfill the vow. Shmuel disagrees with it. Kamashmalan Delo. Shmuel holds that the child cannot fulfill the vow. So therefore, that's his point. That's really the argument here. According to Rabbi Yochanan, if someone has set aside a pregnant animal as a toda, the child is not going to be a toda. I'm sorry, the child could be a toda, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Right? If he put aside a pregnant animal and the animal gave birth, the child could be offered. Whereas according to Shmuel, the same way that a child of a chatas can't be offered as a chatas, so too the child of a toda can't be offered as a toda, and therefore it wouldn't have breads even if the mother hasn't yet been brought. Okay? All right. That we're now on the bottom of Pamad Aleph. Now talking about Karban Toda that gets lost. Amar Rav Abba said, a person who says an adava, Zo Toda, this is the Toda, the Zo Lachma, and this is its bread. He didn't say, on me is an obligation of a Toda. He said, this is a Toda and this is its bread. Avad Alechem, if the bread went missing, maybe Lechem Acher. So then he just replaces the bread with other breads of the Toda. But let's say the animal went missing, maybe Toda Acheres. He doesn't have to bring another animal, because it wasn't that he said, Hare Alai, on me is an obligation. He said, Hare Zu, this is the Toda. So once this went missing, he doesn't have to replace it. And even though he has bread, the bread doesn't pull in an animal. An animal will pull in breads, but breads don't pull in an animal. So Matzaima, what's the reason for this? Lechem liglal Toda. Bread comes because of the Toda. It's secondary to the Toda. So therefore, if he lost the animal, if he lost the bread, he replaces the bread. But ain Toda liglal lechem. But the animal is not secondary to the bread. So if he lost the animal, he doesn't replace it just because he has bread here. All right, another distinction between the bread of the Toda and the animal of the Toda. Amar Rava said, Hifrish ma'os l'todas. Let's say he puts aside money for his Karban Toda. Then he toasts through, and there's leftover. He put aside too much money. He bought an animal, and he has leftover. So what does he do with the leftovers? Maybe bahen lechem. He should use the leftovers to buy bread.
Right.
If you put aside money, l'lachme toda, for breads, when he toasts when he has extras, maybe behen toda, the money that had been put aside for bread, the leftover of it can't be used now to buy the animal. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason of this law? Mishum de Rav Kahana. If it's because of the lesson Rav Kahana, Dam Rav Kahana says, Minay l'lachme toda shnikru toda. How do we know that the breads of the toda are also called toda? because the verse says, "V'hikriv al zevach toda chalos matzos." He'll bring on the toda animal breads of matzah. So it says it's on it. It's sort of part of the animal. If it's part of the animal, so ibchanami should be the opposite too. That if you put aside money for the lachmei toda, and if he has leftover, he should be able to use it for the animal because the bread and the animal are one. And so the Gemara, similar to what we said before, lechem ikri toda. Breads are part of the animal. The breads are called toda. If he said, I'm going to bring a toda, including that is bread. But toda lo ikri lechem. But the toda, the animal, is never called bread. The toda is not secondary to the bread. The bread is secondary to the animal. So therefore, if there was money that had bread holiness, now there's extra of it, since they had bread holiness, so the toda, the animal, was never called bread. Since the toda is not called bread, he can't use that money for bread. Okay, and this was money that has the bread name on it. Rava said further, Hifrish todaso v'avda. The person puts aside a carbon toda and it goes missing. V'chazer v'hifrish acheres tachteha v'avda. And then he went and he put aside another carbon toda in its place. And that also went missing. So he put aside a carbon toda, he lost it. He put aside a second carbon toda to replace the first, he lost the second too. Then he does it a third time. He places it with a third carbon toda. And now now he finds carbon toda 1 and 2. So he has now 3 animals in front of him, all of them with the holiness of a carbon toda. Niskaper barishona, if he decides to use the very first one, the very original one, as his toda, and he gets atonement with that, shniya, the second one, is brought, but it's not going to need bread, because it's a chalife toda that we learned in our Mishnah. It doesn't need bread once the first one is brought. Shlishis, the third one, is brought, and it does need bread. Tu'una lechem, it does need bread, because the third one was set aside to replace the second, but the second was never ultimately brought. So the second that was there to replace the first, and the first is ultimately brought, so this toda obligation was fulfilled through the first. So now the second doesn't need bread. But the third that was replaced for the second, so the second wasn't brought. So since the second wasn't brought, so this doesn't have something brought, therefore it will be brought with bread. If niskaper b'shlishis, if what he brings is the third one, shniya eina tuna lechem, the second is not going to need bread because the second one is linked with the third. So, okay, this toda was brought. The second one will be brought without bread. But Rishona, the first, will be tuna lechem, will need bread because the third is not replacing the first. The third is only replacing the second, and the second wasn't actually brought. So the second, which was replacing the first, wasn't brought. So the first, which is brought, will now need bread. So again, this is a case where they keep getting lost, and ultimately he has all 3. So now, Neskaper B'Emtzais, if the one he chooses to bring is the second, Shteyan Ein Tunas Lechem. Now, the first and the third will be brought, but they don't need any bread. The first doesn't need bread because its replacement was brought with bread. The third doesn't need bread because it is a replacement of something which was ultimately brought with bread. This is the view of Rava. Abai disagrees. Abai said, whether he brings the first, the second, or the third, shtehen, the other 2, ain't unos lechem, do not need bread, because kulu chalifu da'adadininu. All of them are replacements of each other. All of them are extensions of the first. So once one is brought, so this toda vow was brought, and therefore the others are chalife toda that do not need bread.
And they killed the other 2.
They're allowed to die. That's correct. The others are allowed to die. Actually, with the toda, it's with chatas that they are allowed to die. With toda, they don't allow them to die. With toda, they're brought. With chatas, they're allowed to die. So now we go to chatas. Amar Rabbi Zev said, "V'chein linyan chatas." The same would be in regards to a situation of a chatas, a person who mistakenly ate chelev. So hifish chataso, he realizes his sin. He puts aside a chatas, v'avda, and then the chatas got lost. Hifish acheres tachtea, so he put aside a second one to replace the first. V'avda, and that got lost. Hifish acheres, then he set aside a third tachteha. So now he's on to third. But then Nimtzu Rishonos, he found 1 and 2 again. Varish Lashon Omdos, and before he brings any of them, he has all 3. So now what's the law? Says Rabbi Zeir, Niskaper Rishona, if he decides to use A, the very first one, as his chatas, Shnia Tamus, so using the logic of Rava, the second one should now die, because there was a chatas brought. This is a replacement for that. So the owners already got kapara with the first, so this one now goes to death. Shlish is tira, whereas the third, it's not really replacing the first anymore. It was to replace the second, but the second wasn't even brought. So the third will go to pasture to get a blemish and then be redeemed. If niskaper b'shlishis, if he chose to offer the third, shnia tamus, the second one dies because the third replaced the second. So then the second chatas was a situation of a chatas that the owner got atonement somewhere else. So the second one dies. And in Virishona, and the first one, which is so far removed from the third, Tira will go pasture. And if Niskaper Boim Tzayas, if he brought the second one, then both the other 2 will go to death. That would be the view according to Rava. Whereas Abaye, being consistent, comparing chatas to Toda, Abaye will tell you, if you Niskaper Ba'achas Mehan, regardless whether he offers the first, or the second, or the third, Shtehen Yamusu, all the others need to die, because Kulu, Chalifin Da, Dadi Ninu, they're all one big carbon, one's replacing the other. And whenever you have a chatas, Sheniskapu Ba'aleh, that its owner's got atonement somewhere else, then there is no need for, then the animal goes to death, the chatas goes to death. So the Gemara asks, Samai v'chein, why do we have to say this? The same way we have this argument by Toda, we have the argument in regards to chatas. We've already seen Shmuel's telling us that there's the linkage between Toda and chatas, and as Almog defined it for us, that maybe the Toda is a form of a chatas. So the Gemara explains, now that Tim would have thought to say, Hasam Hudi Kalamemer, maybe in regards to Toda you could say, Marba B'Todos Ninhu, right? In Toda, it's a donation. I want to give thanks to Hashem. So I give 1 thing of thanks, 2 things of thanks, 3 things of thanks. That's why it's okay. But when you talk about a chatos, you can't say, I want to give lots of chatos. You can only give 1 chatos. So maybe here we wouldn't say that each are replacements for each other, and therefore only 1 works and the others go to death. Kamash Malan. So that's the Chiddush of Rabbi Zeira, that even though you could have said that logically, but nevertheless, there is a connection between Toda and Chatas, and therefore, if you're going to say, certain standards in regards to Toda, that when there's a total of 3 Todos, the third doesn't come from the first, so then in Chatas also the third doesn't come from the first necessarily, and if you say that they always are connected all to each other in Toda, then they're always all connected to each other in Chatas as well. Okay, Tani Reb Chia taught Toda in a brisa. Toda shenes arva b'tmurasa. Let's say a person has a carbon Toda, tries to do the wrong thing. He tries to say this other animal is replacing my Toda. So now both have the status of Toda, and they get mixed up. Umei sachas man, one of them died. So chaverta in the takana, the other one we don't know what to do with it. We can't offer it. What do we want to do? Nakriv lechem ba'ada. If we want to offer it with bread. Maybe this is the replacement, and a replacement doesn't get bread, as our Mishnah taught us. Lo nakriv lechem b'hadav, we're not going to bring bread with it. So matodi, maybe this is the Toda, and how can you bring a Toda without bread? Ask my Hechidam, what's the case of this Toda? Ida amar alai Toda, if he said on me there's a Toda, so there is a Toda obligation on him. Lo sagid lo meisi, so then of course he has to bring the Toda, right? He accepted on himself an obligation, so right, he can't bring this, let him bring something else. Let him bring some other animal, v'lechem with bread. Let him say like this: Yach kaima. If the animal is still alive, Tmura, he is the Tmura. Then Ha Toda V'Lachma. This is the Toda, this is the bread. Yach kaima Todi. If the one that's alive is the Toda, Ha Lachma. This is the bread. And this animal, Tev Yachrayus. This is just a replacement. When it says Lo Tzricha, what are we talking about? He said Arezu Toda. He said this is the Toda. Since he said Arezu, therefore it's not an obligation on himself. It's a particular animal that's obligated. So now that he doesn't know if he still has that animal, he got mixed up with another animal and one of them died. So now he has nothing that he can do. Okay, we'll continue Bezat Hashem with Siman Limudim. Rabbi Chanani ben Akashya may Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu Zakis Yisrael if he chachir lem Torah mitzvah shenem I think of it's a matzah. So, Amen. Amen.